thoughts from me. I think the main one will be on inequality. And as we think about the future that we want, we also need to think about addressing inequality and how public services can add it or reduce it. So for example, there's a group that mentioned the expressway, we've heard about airports, we've heard about Uber, and transport is an important service. It's an important thing that helps to ease movement, goods and services, so even for business owners, it helps them. But let's think about who is able to access those services. So how many of you have used the expressway? Yeah. A handful. How many people in Kibra, for example, will use the expressway versus how many people are stuck in traffic just under the expressway in matatus and buses? So also as we think about the vision for public services, let's think about what kind of services and how should they be designed to ensure that everybody is able to use them. Like we discussed earlier, regardless of ability, right? So if you have various disabilities, you should be able to use it, but also regardless of how much you earn, where you live, where you come from. Isiolo is a good example. An airport was built in Isiolo. But how many hospitals are in Isiolo? So connected to that is our participation. So this is a very good activity for you to engage with arts, engage with human rights and public services, but also to stir us to think together about what we can be doing. Under the recommendations, one of the people you are to address is ourselves. Public participation in Kenya is another exceptional something that we have in our constitution, that the government must ensure that they hear from the people as they're developing the budget, but as they're developing the plans. Under Vision 2030, there's a 5-year, it's implemented in 5-year intervals. There are 5-year plans, but also every year they develop a plan. Counties also develop their plans. Did you know that your county made a plan for what they're going to do next year, what they're going to prioritize, and that informs the budget they're going to make? So if you can participate when they are making their plans, and you can tell them, we don't need this, what we really need is this. And then when they're making the budget, you follow up. We had said what we really needed was a hospital here. Where is the budget for that hospital? So my closing remarks for you are to think about inequality and how public services can address inequality, services that everyone can access. And secondly, how we can participate to ensure that we actually see the services that we need and that we want for the future that Dr. Waka painted for us from the history. All right, I'll hand over to Linda also for some closing remarks.
So not so much closing remarks as such, but I was just thinking about what Ashina said in terms of participation. And to be able to participate effectively, you have to be very aware of the context in which we are in, right? So Kenya, Nairobi, or wherever it is that you might be. There are many things that impact public services and how they're delivered. So like they don't just appear out of thin air, right? They are implemented, and there are many factors that influence that implementation. And I think I won't have enough time to go into some of these concepts, but I think it's very important that you understand the external factors that are impacting our public services and the internal factors, the things that are homegrown that are impacting the delivery of our public services. So for example, in terms of external factors, things like debt. I'm sure you've been hearing a lot of this lately. Kenya is in debt. We're in debt crisis. We're in debt distress. But how does that debt come about? It's not because our government took loans just from the people. They also took loans from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. They took loans from other countries, other developing countries. And we have to pay back those loans, yeah? You go to a bank, you take a loan, you have to pay it back. But what that means is that all the taxes that we're paying, over 50% of them are going towards debt servicing. So that impacts what? How education will be delivered, how teachers are paid, how health workers are paid, and you've been hearing the complaints that have been coming because there's not enough money to run our public services because we're servicing debt. So that's one example, but there are many other examples of external factors that are influencing our public services. An internal factor that's influencing our public services is corruption. And I think one of you mentioned that the way we have to fight corruption, right? But to do that, you have to participate, as Ashina said. You have to be aware of what that public service should be delivering, and you should be aware of how you should complain and who you should be complaining to. Our laws actually give us many channels to engage. It's just that a lot of our politicians bank on us not knowing, so they just move things along and know that they would be challenged. So just like Ashina said, I urge you to participate. Don't be afraid of your MPs. They are actually working for you. Public services are for the people. These are the people who are meant to be implementing for you. Because you want to pay for it. So, not much else to say. Thank you so much for having us. And looking forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
All I can say is, wow, thank you, ladies. I did not do justice to Ms. Ashina, Coordinator, Tax and Education Alliance, Action Aid International. And then thank you, Linda, your health policy and advocacy. So you come very well represented and representing the true frontier. I'm impressed by what you've said and shared to students, things that sometimes we read about, we don't really know. And what you have done is throwing the ball back into our courts, including myself. When I'm on the expressway, when I'm on the expressway, do I think about the person in Kibera not being able to be there? I am happy they're not there. I want to see them. I'm saying I'm now going to the airport or Kimau or wherever. We need to be a society that thinks about the other person always. And that's what in sociology, which is my home this department, we always think about that. That indeed the other person, when you think about the other person not having, then you adjust yourself because it is for all of you. Here we are in an in-person community discussion. It means something to have a community, otherwise if it was not there, then we wouldn't be there. So I am because you are, and therefore, because I am, you are. Just to give you, before I move to the next session, which starts with art and human rights, that's our next session, Dr. Kimi Wabende, I wanted to share an experience that has to speak to what we have been talking about here. And this was from you, the character development. My experience was not very awful, but I was trying to get my national ID from Mombasa. I went to the chief's office. The first day I didn't find him. I waited for 3 hours. He was nowhere to be seen. I went back home, came back the next day. When I looked into the office, there was nobody. I had been waiting for air. And so, because I was in Mombasa, I waited. He didn't show up until the third day. He found me waiting. I didn't find him. He found me waiting. He treated me badly and sent me away for the next process. There I was sent to the chief again until around 12. That's on the second day, and 2 hours later, it was lunchtime. As he shared stories with the roadside Mitumba sellers. So I'm waiting for the chief to come and give me my ID. He's a Mitumba sellers. It's 2 days later. That is talking to or speaking to accessibility, accountability, availability. It is your right as a Kenyan to get an ID, to get a passport, and to be sick and be treated. Medical student was here talking about that. We all need good health. So before I pour any water on the good fire that is lighting around here, may I please welcome Dr. Kibingichi Wabende, Department Literature UON, Arts and Human Rights. Round of applause. The guy who will discuss a few things. All I can remember is Shakespeare saying we're all actors, the world is a stage. That's all I know. So Kimi knows more than me right here. Thank you.
First of all, let me introduce myself and my colleague who will be running this session, the two of us. My name is Kibingichi Wabende from the Department of Literature at Teach Performing Arts and Oral Literature. With me is my colleague Osaji Mumia. Mumi Osaji. He's not as tall as me, but we've been classmates since first year. So, and then remember, this session is going to be very important. I'm actually giving you tips on how to win the award. So if you don't rely on this to win all that money that is on offer, have yourself to blame. I And then at the end of the session, we are going to have group work. So I'm going to have a very brief introduction, then you'll go into groups and make a presentation for us. Now this version will be artistic presentation, not the version that we were doing before. Now that you've already learned the content, I'm going to teach you the means, the medium of delivery. So I will start with my favorite poem by my favorite playwright and poet, Bertolt Brecht. The poem is called To Eat of Meat Joyously. To eat of meat joyously, a juicy loin cut with a fresh baked fragrant rye bread, chunks from the whole cheese, and swallow a cold beer in a jug. I know such things are held in low esteem, but to my mind, to be put in a grave without ever tasting a mouthful of meat is inhuman. And I say that I was not good at eating. Thank you. Now that's Bertolt Brecht. I like GI for that. They deal with economic, social, and cultural rights. Some of the things we have to remember, the basics. Those of you who are lucky to be eating meat every day, you are lucky. But it always reminds me when I was in the university, after I completed. And sometimes you'll stay in Eastlands, you're passing near these places where they sell meat. And they've roasted a lot of meat. They look juicy. And they just tell myself, the day I will start working, I will just buy a whole tray and eat because of how sweet it looks. And I know I've tasted that. These days I don't wish to eat meat a lot. But I also feel bad if you were to die actually without knowing how sweet and juicy meat is. So, he was talking about a right to food. Can you imagine if you were staying hungry? Those of you who've been watching Palestinians, you've been wondering, how are those people surviving? How tough is it to live like that? But this was a poet. Think about how he reflected before he just thought, oh, let me talk about food. And then he didn't just choose any kind of meat. It is a juicy loin cut. That must be one of the sweetest. And of course, my favorite in terms of visual, a jug of cold beer. I have a gift from one of my students. He brought me a nice jug. I don't drink a lot, but every time I go and pour a whole beer in that jug, I just taste it and tell myself, what will it be for me to leave this world without ever tasting this beer? You don't go away without reflecting about this poem because of how he's brought it out. So, this is an art event. So we have to be thinking, what exactly is this thing we're calling art? And why are we choosing it as a form of activism? So art, when you look at anything artistic, people challenge some of us who are doing literature at the university because we have brothers and sisters who are taking engineering. And they say, what do you study? They say literature. So that you do what? Your brother is going to be building roads, bridges, and the rest. You, when you're doing literature, what is it? We write novels, or we deal with stories. So stories we're after reading. So what? Or you go to someone's house, you look at the wall, they have a painting, and how much is a painting? 40,000. You spend 40,000 on a painting. What does it do? You should have bought a goat. By now it will have multiplied and you'll be rich. But art, we say it gives you what we call aesthetic pleasure. Aesthetic pleasure. And the aesthetic pleasure is pleasure derived from appreciation of beauty. You just look at something and it makes you feel nice. And perhaps it might transform something in your mind. It might make you feel inspired. But you don't go with anything in the pocket. It's not like food. When you eat, you say, now I'm satisfied. No, it has a different kind of touch to it. And suddenly when we were in COVID situation, people seem to appreciate art more. Those who used to think that art is useless, you suddenly realize that it's very important. And people have used art in different ways. You can use art just for entertainment, but as my favorite poet used to say, Bertolt Brecht, that is not a very good use of art. Art must always teach. And that's what we are demanding of you. Express this in artistic form, but let your art do something. Let your art educate. And here we have broadened our scope in such a way that we're not dealing with one art. We have, if we may subdivide them, we have the performing arts. Now, there are those of you who are going to do poetry. How many of you poets? Yes. It might be a choice. You write, but we said that we need the performance element so that we can share it out there. And Bertolt Brecht has given you a challenge. Can you outdo him?